In the middle of a live congressional hearing, Karoline Leavitt quietly muttered, "Go back to Africa," under her breath. She didn't realize her microphone was still on. But what Jasmine Crockett said, or rather, didn't say, afterward left the entire room stunned, and soon, the whole country was watching. Inside the Kansas state capitol, the air was tense and heavy with unease. Papers rustled, pens tapped, and quiet murmurs filled the room, telltale signs of a hearing that had gone on too long and grown far too personal. The tension clung to every shoulder like static. The subcommittee on education policy was deep into its third hour. Frustration was building. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat upright in her sharp blue blazer, calm but alert. She had been silent for most of the last segment, not because she lacked words, but because she was waiting for the right moment. She always did. Across the table sat Karoline Leavitt, once a familiar face from morning politics, now a senior aide on federal education reform. Known for her sharp tongue and unyielding attitude, she wasn't one to retreat from confrontation. But today her composure seemed thin. Something about being challenged, particularly by a confident black woman, clearly unsettled her. When Jasmine finally spoke, her tone was calm yet unwavering. "So, what you're implying," she said, fixing her gaze on Karoline, "is that schools in underfunded areas just aren't putting in enough effort?" Karoline folded her arms and shifted slightly in her chair. "I'm saying that standards must be upheld everywhere, no exceptions." "But the playing field was never level to begin with," Jasmine countered, her voice steady. "We can't talk about fairness without acknowledging access. Context matters. History matters." Karoline let out a quiet scoff, unaware her microphone was still live. That's when it happened. She leaned slightly to her left, not directly into the mic, but close enough. Her words, though muttered, came through the speakers clearly enough to be unmistakable. She should just go back to Africa. A brief silence followed. Someone coughed. Papers shuffled. A throat tightened somewhere in the back. At first, the sound didn't seem to register, until a young black intern near the media desk froze, eyes wide. C-SPAN's live feed didn't cut away. It caught everything. People turned toward Jasmine, expecting an outburst, maybe a walkout, but she stayed still. Her hands remained folded on the table. She blinked once, slowly, then waited. The subcommittee chair, an older congressman from Idaho, cleared his throat. "Let's stay on topic, please." Karoline didn't react. She casually reached for her water bottle and took a sip as if nothing had happened, but the redness creeping up her neck gave her away. She knew. The mic had caught it, and the footage was already circulating. Jasmine looked straight at her. Not angry, not shaken, just composed. It was the kind of look that said, "You didn't expose me, you exposed yourself." She didn't respond aloud. She simply turned back to her notepad, jotted a line, and let the hearing continue. That moment, barely 10 seconds long, spoke louder than any speech could. But silence doesn't stay silent for long, not when microphones are live and the nation is listening. Before the hearing even adjourned, the clip was online. A reporter in the press gallery had recorded the moment, zoomed in just as the words left Karoline's lips. Within 20 minutes, "Go back to Africa" was trending nationwide. Hashtags multiplied. Memes appeared instantly. The video was replayed, slowed down, captioned, dissected from every possible angle. Karoline's team knew the damage was severe. As they exited the chamber, her aide Brian, a young man in a charcoal suit, hurried beside her. "We'll say it was misheard," he whispered. "Shielding her from cameras at the corridor's end," I mumbled. Karoline muttered, walking briskly. "No one knows for sure what I said, but everyone did." The audio was too clear, her tone too sharp, her irritation too obvious. The pause between "go back" said it all. The tone behind it was dismissive. They slipped into a staff hallway as Karoline pulled out her phone, already buzzing with texts from allies and party members. Some were angry, others warned her, but none defended what she said. A statement had to be drafted immediately. By the time her press team released their first response, it read, "Miss Leavitt was misheard due to background noise and misunderstanding. She stands firmly against all forms of racism and discrimination, But the public had already made up its mind. People weren't just upset. They were tired. Not only by what was said, but by how often these moments happened, followed by excuses and PR spin. The pattern was familiar, and people had grown weary of it. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett stayed silent. Reporters followed her to the elevator. "Congresswoman, do you want to respond to Miss Leavitt's comment?" one asked. She looked at them briefly, pressed the elevator button, and said simply, "Not yet." That quiet response stirred both sides. Her supporters called it calm and dignified restraint. Her critics called it calculated. In a nearby cafe, 3 congressional staffers huddled around a laptop replaying the clip. "This is going to explode," muttered a middle-aged staffer, rubbing his temples. "If she speaks, it'll be everywhere." "She has to," another added, but Jasmine wasn't in a hurry. That evening, she stayed at her hotel with her mother, who had flown in from Texarkana the day before. They ate dinner mostly in silence until her mother finally said, "You're going to say something." Jasmine looked out the window at the city lights flickering under a cloudy sky. "Yes," she replied, "but it won't be what they expect." Elsewhere, Karoline couldn't sleep. She sat on her hotel bed, laptop open, watching cable news replay the clip over and over. Her phone buzzed with missed calls from donors and colleagues. Some advised her to lay low. Others urged her to apologize, but humility wasn't Karoline's instinct. Not yet. "She misheard me," she whispered again, mostly to herself. Brian, sitting across the room, didn't respond. He just watched her, not with anger but concern. He knew it was no longer just about her career. The situation had grown bigger than both women. Karoline was starting to realize she no longer controlled the story. Power was shifting. Quietly, unexpectedly. And Jasmine was about to take control in a way no one predicted. The next morning, the Capitol cafeteria was unusually quiet. Cameras lined the hallway outside the press room, cords trailing across the floor. Reporters sipped burnt coffee, glancing at their phones. Something was coming. They could feel it. At exactly 10 a.m., Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett walked up to the podium alone. No aides, no flags, no speechwriters, just her, a black folder in hand, and the same calm she'd shown the day before. The cameras clicked as she approached the microphone. She waited a moment, long enough for the room to settle, then opened the folder, glanced at it once and closed it. "I was going to read a prepared statement," she said, "but I don't think I need to." She leaned slightly forward. "What happened yesterday wasn't new to me." Her voice was steady, not emotional or performative, just measured. "I've been told to go back since I was a teenager in a store line in Shreveport. Back then, it was an older woman who didn't like that I looked her in the eye. I've heard it on airplanes, whispered in elevators, even in boardrooms, just phrased more politely. So no, I wasn't shocked." She paused as a few reporters shifted in their seats. "What did surprise me," she continued, "was that some people thought I should be shocked. Like this was the first time something like that had ever been said. As if this country usually runs on respect. That's not the America I've known." The room was silent. No camera clicks, no interruptions. "I want people to understand something," she said. "When you tell someone to go back, you're not questioning their citizenship. You're questioning their belonging, their worth, their place at the table." Then she looked directly into the camera. "And I'm not going anywhere." That single line spread across thousands of screens before the press conference even ended. It reached classrooms, barbershops, and small-town porches. Places that had never heard of Jasmine Crockett before, but recognized that strength. She didn't cry or raise her voice. She simply told her story. "One year, my father took me to Washington, D.C. We stood outside the Supreme Court, and he told me, 'This building belongs to you, too.' I was 11. I didn't believe him. Some days I still don't." She exhaled softly. "But I came here anyway. I ran for office anyway. I take up space here anyway. Not because I was invited, but because I know I don't need permission." Her words weren't rehearsed. They were honest and sharp. "I'm not here to shame Karoline Leavitt," she added. "I'm here to remind people that belonging doesn't have to be earned by perfection." We belong because we're human, because we wake up here, work here, build here, and love here. We belong because our ancestors built the foundation that made this place possible." She paused, letting silence settle before concluding. And if that makes someone uncomfortable enough to say what she said, maybe that discomfort is something they need to sit with. Not me. The conference ended with no questions. She folded her folder, stepped away from the podium, and left, like she had better things to do than argue. And she did. Her phone started ringing within seconds. Messages from people crying, cheering, even from across the aisle. "You said what I couldn't say out loud." But not everyone applauded. Some were already preparing a backlash that would test everything she stood for. By noon, her speech had been clipped, shared, and reposted on every major platform. Millions watched it before lunch. Some replayed it more than once, not because they missed it, but because they needed to feel it again. Across the country, the response felt different, not in hashtags or slogans, but in quiet conversations. In a small diner outside Toledo, Ohio, an older man named Reggie sat at his usual booth, leaning over his coffee. A man lifted his cup and said to the waitress, "I didn't even know her name before this, but that woman's got steel in her spine." In Flagstaff, Arizona, a Navajo high school teacher paused her lesson. She projected the video for her students and let them sit in silence for a moment. Then she said, "That's how you carry yourself when someone tries to tear you down." Meanwhile, in Fresno, California, a retired white veteran named Bill logged into Facebook for the first time in over a year, just to post one line. She spoke for more than just herself. But not everyone saw it that way. Conservative radio hosts quickly began shaping their version of events. One commentator in Des Moines shouted into his mic, "Another staged attempt to play the victim and divide the country. She's just grandstanding." Callers poured in. Some agreed, others pushed back. "She didn't throw a tantrum," one caller argued. "She told the truth. You don't like how it sounds? Maybe ask yourself why Karoline stayed quiet." Karoline's team soon issued another statement, this one longer and more polished. It expressed regret if her words had been misunderstood, but stopped short of any real apology. The internet tore it apart overnight. Inside a borrowed townhouse in Arlington, Virginia, Karoline paced back and forth. The blinds were drawn, lights dim. She replayed the clip again. The calm, controlled tone of Jasmine's words, the quiet strength underneath. "She's winning this," Karoline muttered. Her aide, Brian, leaning on the counter, nodded. "You're not spinning out of this one. Not this time." "I didn't mean it like that," Karoline whispered. "It just came out." "That's the problem," Brian said quietly. Elsewhere, the ripple effect was growing. On a college campus in Madison, Wisconsin, students filled an auditorium meant for another topic entirely. The panel turned into a discussion about identity, belonging, and who truly feels at home in America. In a barbershop in Mobile, Alabama, Jasmine's speech played repeatedly between haircuts. Older men stopped mid-trim to talk about the way she handled herself. "Back in my day, you'd either shout or swing," one man said. She did neither. That takes more strength than people realize. But Jasmine was feeling the weight of it all too. She sat alone in her apartment, the lights dimmed, a glass of water in her hand. She hadn't turned on the news. She didn't want to hear her name spoken by people who couldn't understand what it meant to carry that kind of silence in a room like that. Her phone buzzed again. The name on the screen made her pause. Senator Leah Drummond, a conservative from Texas. The message was short. That was powerful. "Would you meet?" Jasmine stared at the screen. She wasn't surprised, but in that instant the world felt heavier. Her words had stirred something. People were listening. People who had never reached out before. But one person still hadn't said anything. And when she finally did, it would change everything. During a live congressional hearing, Karoline Leavitt muttered under her breath, "Go back to Africa." She didn't realize her mic was still on. What Jasmine Crockett said next left the entire room silent and the rest of America watching. Inside the Kansas state capitol, the air was tense and dry, filled with the sound of shifting papers and clinking pens, signs of a hearing that had gone on too long and gotten too personal. You could feel the tension cling to jackets like dust. The Congressional Subcommittee hearing on education. Policy was stretching into its third hour. Tempers were rising. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat tall in her blue blazer. She'd been silent through much of the last segment. Not because she had nothing to say, but because she was carefully choosing when to speak. Across the table sat Karoline Leavitt, once a familiar face from morning political shows, now serving as a senior aide for federal education and reform. Known for her sharp tongue, ambition, and refusal to back down, she looked unsettled that day, defensive, irritated. Being challenged, especially by a confident black woman, seemed to strike a nerve. When Jasmine finally spoke, her tone was calm yet firm. "So what you're implying," she said, locking eyes with Karoline, "is that schools in underfunded districts simply aren't putting in enough effort?" Karoline folded her arms and shifted in her chair. "I'm saying standards need to apply equally everywhere. No exceptions. But the system was never equal to begin with," Jasmine replied evenly. "We can't discuss fairness without talking about access. Context matters, and so does history," Karoline scoffed quietly. The mic in front of her was still on. That's when it happened. She leaned slightly to her left, not directly into the mic, but close enough for her words to carry through the speakers. Her voice, low but clear, cut through the silence. She should just go back to Africa. A pause. Then came a cough, a shuffle of papers, the tightening of throats. The room didn't register it right away, until a young black intern near the media table froze. His head turned slowly toward Karoline. The C-SPAN feed kept rolling. It was live. Some people glanced at Jasmine, waiting for her to react, maybe to walk out or confront Karoline. But she didn't. She simply folded her hands, blinked slowly, and waited. The subcommittee chair, an older man from Idaho, cleared his throat. "Let's stay on topic, please." Karoline didn't move. She picked up her water bottle and took a slow sip, pretending nothing had happened. But the redness in her ears told the truth. She knew the mic had caught her. Within minutes, clips were already being shared online. Jasmine looked directly at her, not angry, not shaken, just composed. Her expression said everything. "You didn't hurt me. You only revealed who you are." She didn't respond. She simply turned back to her notepad, made a small note, and let the hearing continue. Those 10 seconds spoke louder than any speech could. And silence doesn't stay silent for long, not when the country is listening. Within a week, the moment had gone national. People who rarely followed politics were talking about it. Truck drivers hearing it on late-night radio outside Wichita, or teenagers discussing it in group chats between classes in Eugene, Oregon. The moment had touched something deeper. Not just about race, but about respect, about how easily people dismiss others, and how rare it is to see someone hold their ground without anger. Discussion panels sprang up everywhere. Analysts debating Jasmine's restraint, Karoline's apology, and everything in between. Some called Jasmine's reaction a masterclass in composure. Others argued she'd been too forgiving. One commentator on a late-night show said, "There was no shouting, no spectacle. And maybe that's why it hit so hard." She didn't fight with rage. She answered with dignity. Still, not everyone accepted Karoline's apology. In Birmingham, civil rights activist Lori Price went live on social media. "This isn't about a few words," she said. "It's about the mindset behind them. An apology means nothing if the culture that breeds those words doesn't change." Meanwhile, Jasmine sat quietly in her office, surrounded by stacks of handwritten letters. One stood out, from a 5th-grade girl in Boise, Idaho. The child had drawn Jasmine at a podium, with the words, "You talk like my mom, calm but strong." Jasmine placed it on her desk. She knew praise could fade as fast as it came. Later that week, she spoke privately to a group of interns. No cameras, no notes. "Don't aim to go viral," she told them. "Aim to move forward. This town rewards noise, but it respects consistency. Be honest. Be human." Karoline, meanwhile, was still struggling. Her apology softened some critics, but many weren't convinced. Protesters showed up at her next event in Sioux Falls, holding signs that read, "Words have weight." That night, back in her hotel room, Karoline stood before the mirror, wiping off her makeup. She looked exhausted. Her aide, Brian, sat by the window scrolling through headlines. "You still doing press tomorrow?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, I think I need to listen before I talk again." It wasn't resignation, maybe the start of accountability, or maybe just reality sinking in, but something had shifted. Eventually, the media moved on, as it always does. A new controversy elsewhere took over the headlines, yet something about that moment lingered. Not in the news, but in everyday conversations, in kitchens, break rooms, and small-town diners where someone would still say, "Did you see that hearing?" The other person would nod and respond, "Yeah, she said what needed to be said at the airport in Santa Fe." A TSA officer stopped Jasmine gently. "You reminded us what quiet strength can look like," she said. Jasmine smiled. "Thank you," she replied. "I didn't think it would reach this far." The officer nodded. "Not every story ends in fireworks. Sometimes, it's the calm after the storm that stays with people the longest. Even silence carries power, if we're willing to sit with it and ask what it's teaching us." 2 months later, everything looked normal on the surface. Congress was back to business. The news cycle had moved on, and conversations were filled with talk of midterms, border policies, or the latest scandal involving someone half the country never supported. But beneath all that noise, something subtle had shifted in Charleston, South Carolina. A civics teacher began her fall semester differently that year. Instead of opening with the Constitution, she played footage from Jasmine's press conference. Then she asked her students a question. "What does it mean to belong?" A student in the back raised her hand and answered, "It means you don't have to explain why you're here." That response stayed with the teacher. Back in Washington, Jasmine Crockett didn't suddenly become a household name. She wasn't offered book deals or magazine covers, but she did attract a growing number of young staffers who wanted to work for her, not because she spoke the loudest, but because her words carried weight. She also noticed a quiet shift in the halls of Congress. People who had barely acknowledged her before now greeted her with a nod. One congressman from Montana stopped her and said, "You didn't just stand up for yourself. You stood up for a lot of people who never had the chance to speak." Jasmine paused, then smiled. "That was the goal," she said. As for Karoline Leavitt, she chose to stay out of the spotlight. No interviews, no talk shows, no emotional public statements, just steady work behind the scenes. She met privately with advocacy groups, not to perform, but to listen. In one meeting in Columbus, Ohio, a college student asked her directly, "What changed for you?" Karoline didn't avoid the question. "Getting caught didn't change me," she said. "Being challenged did, and I'm still figuring out what that means." No one applauded. They didn't have to. That wasn't the purpose. Later that fall, a quiet vote passed on a bill focused on improving equity in federal school funding. Jasmine co-sponsored it. Karoline supported it too. They didn't stand side by side. No photo opportunity, no public reconciliation. But they voted the same way. It didn't make headlines. It wasn't dramatic, but for those paying attention, it meant something. What happened in that committee room wasn't just about one comment. It was about what we become when we're tested. Jasmine didn't walk away from the moment with fame. She walked away with deeper influence, the kind that lasts after the cameras stop rolling. And Karoline didn't turn into a villain. She became a reflection, prompting people to ask themselves, how many times have I said something in private that I'd never say in public? In the end, this wasn't a story about controversy. It was a story about choice. The choice to speak firmly without shouting, to teach without humiliating, to respond without turning another person into a mistake. In an age where everyone feels pressured to pick a side, Jasmine chose something different. Clarity over noise, and that decision left a mark far deeper than outrage ever could. Some political moments fade quickly. This one didn't, because people remember strength without cruelty. They remember composure, restraint, and the way someone stands steady when the ground shakes beneath them. Maybe that's the real lesson. You don't have to shout to make an impact. You just have to be sincere when it matters most. If this story made you think, share it. And if you want more stories that reflect who we are and who we're trying to become, subscribe. We're only getting started.